Hello and welcome. I'm so glad that you've taken time out of your day to come join me in learning how to create your own unit study. I'm Katie with Katie's Homeschool Cottage, and we're going to have a great time looking over ideas of how you can create your own unit study, have fun learning, and also make some memories along the way. So let's get started. You're in the right place if you want to be able to save time and energy during the day. You also want to be able to teach some subjects together with all of your kiddos. You also want to have fun and make memories while learning. As I said, I'm Katie with Katie's Homeschool Cottage, and I'm a former teacher and homeschool mom with over 30 years of experience. I homeschooled my guys through high school, and they both graduated with master's degrees with distinction. And as you can tell, I'm a proud mama. We used an eclectic mix of homeschooling methods, and one of them was unit studies. We have such wonderful memories of all that we did together while learning. Even almost 20 years later, we still talk about some of the activities that we did. Now, a lot of these ideas we used mostly during elementary and middle school, and then we did a more out-of-the-box learning along with some traditional learning in the latter part of middle school and high school. So I invite you to find the workshop called Out of the Box Learning for your homeschool, where I share what we did for really mostly the high school years in our learning. What you'll learn today is how to brainstorm a unit study topic idea, how to organize those thoughts, how to put those ideas into lesson plans, and then what a unit study looks like when it all comes together. So you're going to see a lot of pictures and also some forms that I've created to help you get your ideas down on paper and then organize them into some more detailed thoughts and then put together a lesson plan. And it really doesn't take that much time once you get the ideas rolling in. Now, don't forget, you've got a handout that you will find a link for down below underneath this workshop. And this handout has all the steps and the descriptions of how to create your own unit study. And you'll also find a list of suggested time periods to choose from as your topic with ideas for handicrafts, projects, and activities to include in your unit study. And be sure to watch until the end to hear how to get this free special bonus, Create Your Own Unit Study Toolkit that I've put together so that you have the tools right away to get started on creating your own unit study. Now, the first stage is brainstorming, and we are focusing on starting with a historical time period as our foundation, because I found that that was the easiest way for me to sit with the kids, find out what they were interested in, and what they would be excited about of really delving into and learning. And then from there, we then talk about maybe some aspects of that time period that they find interesting. And I do a little bit of research and we get some ideas rolling. Now, you can begin in a chronological order with ancient history, or if your children are more interested in current history and you find that that would be easier to get started, then you can also start with more modern history. And then go back to ancient history in your social studies or history curriculum each year. And what I'm about to show you was not all done in one year. It was over a span of a number of years. So then, as I said, once you get some idea of the time frame that you want to study, then start doing some research. And I usually did this using maybe a history textbook or what I call a spine, which is more like a history textbook, but it's told in a story type format. And there are a number of them out there for homeschoolers. The one that is very popular would be The Story of the World, and it's told in chapters and story format. Also, take a look at the internet and get some ideas of maybe some important events, people, places, discoveries, explorations that were done during that time period, and that will really get the ball rolling. And then on your brainstorming sheet, you can write down key terms, items, events, people, places you want to make sure to include. And as you can see, this brainstorming sheet has different places for different academic subject areas to include in your unit study, which is what makes it a unit study. You're just not studying history, you're also including different academic subject areas, such as science, math, literature. You can even explore clothing, costumes, cooking. I've got different tools, everyday objects, toys that children might have played with, any kind of arts, handicraft, architecture. If you want to include the Bible and how the Bible relates to that time period, or if it's ancient history, things that are in the Bible that are reflected in history, and then music, drama, games, geography, and then you go back to history. And as you can tell, this really is a large unit. Now, you can include all of these areas if you're very excited about the time period and really spend a lot of time, maybe even a half a year studying it, a whole year. There's no limit on what you can do. But if you just want to maybe hit some highlights, you can pick and choose what areas you want to include. Now, some of the time periods may not have particular science discoveries or math concepts that were developed during that time. And they might be a little bit more difficult to include in the unit study, and that's okay. Now, as far as like grammar, spelling, vocabulary, the vocabulary can be terms and definitions of things that you're learning about with the time period. But as far as grammar and spelling, you might not include that in your unit study. Those would be subject to separate areas. The same thing with your math day-to-day concepts and skills that you're studying. They don't have to be part of the unit study, and that's okay. The next step is to organize your ideas, and you would use this goal planning sheet that I've created. And you can see that each goal planning sheet has an academic subject area at the top. So that way you can organize your thoughts according to, okay, this is what I want to include for history. These are the things that happened in science. These are the things that had to do with art and architecture, and so on. So on one side, you have skills and topics that you want to learn. And then next to it, you have the space to write down any kind of activities, projects, or even book titles that you want to use to read together. Most of the time we did our reading together. For the older kids, maybe you want to assign a book for them to read or listen to on their own, such as a classic that might have been written during that time period, or a more difficult book that they can read on their own or listen to on audio that might be too high for the younger kids to enjoy. So this gives you an opportunity to just brainstorm what you want to learn, and then what materials or activities and projects you're going to use or complete about those topic areas. Now, you can start, as I said, with the planning page, and I usually start with an overview first. I might write the word overview here, and that would tell me that I want to include some events, people, places, and then I would list those here. And then next, as I said, over here, for instance, I might start out with a spine type book, like I said, which is sort of a history story written in chapters, and it's almost like a story format textbook. If you want to use textbooks, that's great, and pick out certain chapters of the textbook to use. That's terrific too. We did a lot of reading together. There's about 3.5 year difference between my guys in ages. So we did a lot of reading together, and then I might assign something extra for my older child to read on his own or listen to an audio story. And I'll give you some examples as we go along. Now, the reading can be fiction or nonfiction, and it might give it an overview of what life was like, about a certain person, a certain event, just maybe an overview of the time period. And then again, any kind of projects that the kids might find interesting. And we would brainstorm some ideas together of what they like to do. Now for the literature, and as a former English teacher, I'm a big proponent of including literature that is either fictional or even somewhat fictional, and I would put the titles here, and they would be pieces of literature that were either written about the time period, or, as I said, events or people, or it could be literature written during that time period, such as Homer with the Odyssey. Now, that sounds scary because we might remember the Odyssey as something we maybe read in high school or even college. But there are a lot of pieces of literature that we would think about as more difficult, but it's written in more of a children's story format, so it actually is fun for them to hear. And again, we did a lot of read-alouds. We also found a video on YouTube where it sounds like Homer reciting the Odyssey, because there's a cadence to it and a rhythm and some rhyme, which is why it was oral storytelling and easier for people back then to retell stories, and they did it in an oral fashion. So we listened to a lot of the Odyssey as well as reading the children's version of the Odyssey. And then, as I said, this is where you can also have separate lists for different age groups. Maybe easier books that you might read with the littles, or the littles can read on their own, and then more challenging ones for the olders. And you can include books here that you'll read together. So we did individual and group reading. For the longer read alouds, such as our spine or our textbook that was in story format, it was in chapters. And so we would read aloud, and then we might have a writing assignment where they had to write a paragraph, and it was as they got into practice, it would be maybe a couple sentences, and then it grew to longer paragraphs. By the end of the year, it was pretty impressive. So I encourage you to try this, where they summarized what they heard during the read aloud, and they wrote it in sentences, and they would think about and recollect what they heard. And that includes a lot of thinking skills. They recall information, attention to detail, sequencing, organizing, recall, and that also helps cement the information that they're learning about, because they're thinking about what they read, they're trying to put it into their own words, and that also helps them to use the vocabulary that they're learning and to use it as their own vocabulary. So that really helps them to adapt that vocabulary as their own, which is terrific. And it's great writing practice. Now, for the rest of the subjects, you might have something like architecture, art, and handicrafts. And this is where you put all the other topics about your time period. So I have a page for each of these different areas about the time period that you saw in the bubbles on the brainstorming sheet. And here you can just put things that might have to do with, for instance, architecture, with the Parthenon or the Colosseum or castles, things that were built in a certain way during those time periods. And then over here, you might put any kind of books that you might find, and the library is a terrific source to find these things. There are some wonderful books about certain topics that are very specific, and they're fun for the kids to look at, and you can read them like a book, or you can just skim through them and take a look at the different pictures and read captions. There's no rules here about how much you need to accomplish. It's what suits your needs and interests at the time. And then any kind of activities and projects. And there are some wonderful things out there on the internet and books from the library that show you how to create your own castle, how to create your own pyramid, that kind of thing. So you could find a book or a website that will help you find different models to create. You can find the information on the books and websites, and I have a particular website I recommend, and I will tell you about that. Now here's your lesson planning time. This is where you get to decide in what order you want to cover things and do what activities. And you can see that it's labeled just lesson planning, and this is where you pull it all together. So you can combine your different subject academic subject areas each week and decide what you're going to do, and then what resources or activities you're going to do over here. So this is where you might say historical overview, and you'd have the name of the book, story of the world, chapters and pages such and such, read, and then summarize. And then you might say learn about castles, look at internet page www. such and such, build the model that they recommend. So you would list the items that you want to do, the topics that you want to do here, and then, as I said, the places that you're going to go to read or learn about it, and then the activities. Now here are some sample pages that I've created of what we did for ancient Greece. And as I said, if you hang on for the bonus, you're going to be able to get all of these things. So don't panic and think about you have to write all of this down right this minute. You're going to actually get it if you sign up with me for the bonus. And it is free, and I want to help you get started right away and make it as easy as possible. So you can see that I put ancient Greece as my time period, and then up here for math, we looked at Pythagoras, we looked at the Pythagorean theorem, we looked at Euclid, and here's some book title. It's a book title that I came across, What's Your Angle? Pythagoras, and we looked at Archimedes. And the same thing for science. Archimedes, he had several important scientific discoveries, so we were able to tie in some math and science. And then literature, My Spine, Story of the World. We also looked at the children's Homer, which talked about the Odyssey. We had Aesop's Fables, which are great for kids. And then we looked at some classic myths, and we had a book called Classic Myths to read aloud. And then we included some learning about the clothing, costumes, and cooking. And I'm going to show you some things that we had made. And then we have some toys, tablets, tools, things that they wrote with while they were in school, which the kids found fascinating. And then you can see we have different examples of architecture, how we incorporated the Bible, especially since we were including the study of Greek gods, and we are Christian. So I wanted to make sure that the kids understood that these Greek gods were not ones that we follow. And then we had music, drama, and games, which was terrific because drama was a big thing with the Greeks. Geography, we did maps, obviously. And then history, we did a timeline. And I put in some things here of what we wanted to cover. And then over here, you can see I started to organize these thoughts and put them into history. And I put down the different things that we were going to study: Trojan Wars, Plato, Socrates, Aristotle, Pericles, Xerxes, and the Persian Wars. And you can see I didn't quite finish this part here, but we did study it. Oops. Now, and then you can see on this side, I have My Spine, I have Maybe, right? There is something wonderful that I appreciated, and you might be able to find it. It's by Evan Moore, and it's with, it's a kind of a paperback workbook. It's history pockets and literature pockets, and they're wonderful activities where you can make pockets out of construction paper. And then they've got paper activities that are learning activities about different subject areas, history and different types of literature. And you construct these things with paper, and it's fun, but you learn a lot at the same time. And then you put them in the pockets and put the pockets together to make a booklet. And we did this for a couple different subject areas, and we had a lot of fun constructing them. So look for literature pockets or history pockets. And then I had a list of possible books that we would look at. The Trojan War we read about, and some books that went along with the Trojan War. And then the internet site that I love and I recommend that you try out is Mr. Donn, MRDONN.org. And he has different historical time periods with wonderful information about each historical time period. I encourage you to check it out. And then, as you can see, the different historical topics and the resources and ideas including field trips to our local natural history museum, because they actually had a traveling exhibit on the ancient Greeks. And so we were able to see that information, plus we had an art museum nearby and we were able to go see some art. And that was interesting as well. So then we move on to literature, and as I said, there's different books that I want to make sure to include, including Aesop's Fables, and then the myths, and as well as Homer. And then I wrote down what we want to do with those pieces of literature, not just read them, but there were some activities that we did that included concepts such as elements of a plot, where we talked about the exposition, the rising action, climax, falling action, the resolution. We made a plot graph. So there were different things that we did along with the literature. We didn't just do reading. So you can do as much or as little as you want. And then here are some samples of the types of books we used. And as I said, we used a spine. This is a copy of the Story of the World, and there are different time periods. And I would recommend this if your children would love to just listen to history as a story. And then we have classic myths to read aloud. And when we did ancient Greece and ancient Rome, we read about the mythology as well as the different stories having to do with the Odyssey and the Iliad. And you can see over here we have the Aeneid, which was the Roman version of the Iliad. And then we have a chapter version of the Odyssey, which my older son read. The younger one listened to stories. And then some more books. We have a chapter version of Aesop's Fable, and we have a children's version of Aesop's Fable. And then again, we have math and music, things that we did with music, what we wanted to learn about their instruments, and Pythagoras's contribution to music, and what we were going to use to learn about that. And then the same thing with architecture, art, and handicrafts. You can have a lot of fun with art and architecture as well as handicrafts. If you look at what they did, such as the Greek vases and pottery, we made a Grecian urn out of salt dough. And we also made our own tragedy or comedy masks that they would have worn during a play, because we read about their plays, and we made them out of paper mache. So we blew up a balloon, we took newspaper, put it in flour and water, created the masks. When it was dry, we popped the balloon, which the kids loved. We made holes for eyes. We had shaped a nose, and we cut out a mouth, and then they were able to paint them. So we had a wonderful, wonderful experience with that. And you can tell they really were into it. Another one we did, which they really enjoyed, was Middle Ages. And remember, you don't have to do a unit study for every single time period. You just want to maybe do it for the ones that you're really going to find interesting. And then find another way to study some other kinds of time periods of history if you're not particularly wanting to delve into it too deeply. We loved the Middle Ages. The guys were infatuated with the idea of knights and castles and different types of weapons that were used, and the different kinds of wars and things like that. At one point, we studied the armor and the flags and the types of crests that families had, and we explored our own both sides of the family, and found out what the crest looked like and what they meant. And we also explored, as I said, the different area. Our family actually came from Wales and Ireland and Scotland. So we were able to trace our family back to a certain point and see how they related to, possibly, what area and what was going on in that area during the Middle Ages. We also made a book about the Middle Ages, where we created illuminated pages. And it was an ABC book, and for each letter of the alphabet, we would pick something that we were learning about the Middle Ages, and they would write a little paragraph about it and draw a picture. So by the time we were done, we had A through Z, and these illuminated pages and an illuminated cover, just like monks did in monasteries. We put it together and sewed it with tapestry thread, and made our own illuminated book. And then you can see we made some pieces like covers of different types of notebooks that we put together. And that would be a cover that would go with a bunch of pages that we put together learning about the Middle Ages. And then some activities we did, you can see that they had some fun drawing with the different tools. They reenacted their own version of Beowulf. And yeah, there is a children's version of Beowulf, and we read that aloud. And then we created our own Middle Ages feast. And we had sat down in costume, we talked about the food, we tried to use the Middle Ages language, and at the end is when my children reenacted their version of Beowulf. And because during the Middle Age feasts there would be something called the mystery play, and our mystery play was Beowulf. And we had little finger bowls, and we served what they would have eaten, and we used wooden spoons, no knives, no forks, and we had candles because at that time we had no electricity, and they had a blast. We had some other activities, as I said, from ancient Egypt and Greece. We made our own papyrus paper. We made these Greek masks. We made a Grecian urn. We also made our own pita bread from scratch. And we mummified chicken bones for ancient Egypt. For the early America, we did a lot of field trips because it was easier, obviously, to go to someplace related to early America than the ancients. And so I had one son who was very big into the American Revolution as well as the Civil War, and he loved getting involved with any local reenactments. And we also did a tour of, we had relatives up and down the East Coast, so as we were traveling to see them, we would stop at places like Colonial Williamsburg, Jamestown, Sturbridge Village, and these places will have local reenactments sometimes on special weekends. And we would do crafts, handicrafts, such as weaving, and making, as I said, different recipes during the time period. We also stopped at Valley Forge, and we made timelines during different time periods. Some more samples of books would be something like that you'd be able to find at the library, would be even like medieval projects. These are wonderful that you can build yourself. A book about Magna Carta doesn't have to be complex or boring. It can be a story about the Magna Carta and how it was formed. This one is great for those Lego builders, knights and castles. And then you have a wonderful book here called Good Masters, Sweet Ladies, and this is all told from different types of people and from different classes during that time of what their life is like. So it doesn't have to be boring. Everything can be stories. It can be history brought to life. And then you can use books like this where you don't have to read it word for word because that can be boring, but you can open it up and just look at what captures your interests about knights, or just pick out certain things that you want to read about. Some more samples of types of literature. Chanticleer and the Fox is a great book. Castle Diary is actually the diary of a page who is trying to learn to become a knight. And something that sounds very frightening would be Shakespeare at an early age. But Shakespeare doesn't have to be scary. There's wonderful books written for children, Tales from Shakespeare by Charles and Mary Lamb, and there's also other versions where it's told in story format instead of a complicated play, and little kids really do enjoy hearing some of these plays because they are quite funny. So what to do now? You want to make sure that you download your handout for this workshop with the steps that we've talked about and how to create your own unit study. And as I said, that link is down below this workshop. You're also going to go to https://katieshomeschoolcottage.com/product/creating your own unit study toolkit. That way you will have all of the forms that you need in order to create your own unit study and get started. The samples that I showed you for the ancient Greek study are also included in that packet for the toolkit, so you can get started right away to follow that example or to use it as your own unit study. And also you'll find another surprise gift included in the back, a link to a mini free George Washington unit study, so make sure you grab that as well. And if you can't find this link or you can't remember it and you don't have time to write it all down right now, go to my shop, scroll through my shop, and then you'll see the Create Your Own Unit Study toolkit there for free, as well as the mini George Washington unit study. So just visit katieshomeschoolcottage.com and you will find the toolkit there to download. You can also connect with me on Instagram, also on Facebook, as well as a Facebook group, Homeschool Language Arts Corner, and find me on Pinterest at Katie's HS Cottage. And then also my email address is katie@katieshomeschoolcottage.com, as well as my website. Remember, childhood memories are like footprints on our soul, and making memories with your children, because in years to come, you'll want to remember days such as these. And with unit studies, you're going to be able to make sure to make lots and lots of memories while learning and remember what you learn at the same time. Have a great day. And again, thanks for joining me. And I look forward to seeing you at Katie's Homeschool Cottage.